joining me. I think we can safely assume that the Democrats, with 2 weeks to go before the midterm elections, are engaging in extreme dirty tricks to try to hold on and win the congressional races. I'm not suggesting that Republicans are at times, from time to time, guilty of similar tactics, but I'm saying that given their orientation, which is power at any cost, they're all about the attainment of power, earthly power. There's no, soul there. It's all just how do we gain power for power's sake, and that any means to gain power is virtuous. They will resort to really ugly tactics, the kind of things they would tear the country apart if they thought it could lead them to winning power. Now, the usual tactics, the type they usually use in elections, isn't really working this time. The usual charges that the opponents have something against women, they've got something against black people, they've got something against various ethnic groups. There's sort of the politics of identity and division. It just isn't quite enough to pull them over the finish line. And also the attacks on President Donald Trump don't seem to be working as well for them as they had hoped. This constant daily demonization and hate that I think they genuinely feel, but I think they also view as a tactic, which they pour upon Trump in the media outlets. That isn't really working either, because the economy is good and because people see through that generally, and they know that they're getting used to Donald Trump's style of communication, which can be crude at times. It certainly can be cruel, but is not hateful, is not meaning ill toward anyone. I think that people are getting used to that. So they're resorting to extreme tactics. Now, to start with, they are going after people that President Trump might appoint, particularly to the judiciary, or people running for Senate or the House, in ways that are unprecedentedly ugly. And I think it started with their attack in Alabama of Roy Moore. That's where they could taste the blood for the results of their actions. They basically framed Roy Moore, who dated some underage women who were not underage, but pretty close to it, back when he was a young man, probably, I think he was just out of the Army. Probably back then he was a liberal Democrat. Here they are 30 years later, 40 years later, and they're making this into an issue when it really had nothing to do with who Roy Moore was today. They wanted to attack him because he was a conservative Republican. He also had enemies amongst the Republican Party who are Me Too Democrats and who are left-wingers themselves. And they were able to do this, even if they had to throw Al Franken under the bus just to keep some level of credibility. Hey, what the heck? We'll sacrifice a few of our own. We'll gain more territory later. The important thing to them was to destroy Roy Moore, make sure he didn't enter the Senate. And they did it, which, of course, gave them, as I say, a taste for blood. And they used the same tactics against the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. Suddenly, they trot out accusers at the last minute. They hid the information until it was just the right time. Then they had national hearings. To hell with the fact that they were ripping open a wound for millions of women who have been sexually assaulted and raped, and using that kind of emotion and driving that in order to stop someone politically that they wanted to get to. And even putting aside the fact that it led to a weakening in this country of the rule of law and the understanding of innocence, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and the importance of evidence and other things that are part of our system of government, and that are actually principles that are important and sacred because they protect everyone from false accusations. All that went out the window, and they pushed this emotion right up to the last minute, when a George Soros operative paid $250,000 a year as head of an agency showed up in an elevator with a camera crew from CNN, as if that's a coincidence, to corner Jeff Flake with a lot of caterwauling about don't you care about women, and getting him to throw in perhaps a wrench into the Kavanaugh hearing. In spite of all of this, they failed. Brett Kavanaugh today is on the Supreme Court, thank God. What he did 35 years ago as an obnoxious high school kid is less relevant to who he is today. And now we have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, just as President Trump promised, and we're all better off for that, including liberals who don't necessarily want to see the country go off the deep end. But here we are, and that didn't work. In fact, it actually strengthened resolve among many Republicans, and the war on women, I don't think really has worked. We'll see on Election Day. I think they assume women aren't smart enough to see through it. So now I think they're bringing out really ugly things. I mean, this attack in the New York Times on Jared Kushner for paying no taxes. I mean, I know I got into this before, but it has more than a whiff of anti-Semitism to it. It's the same trick that Harry Reid tried to pull on Mitt Romney. He strided out of his office and declared, Mitt Romney has paid no taxes for 10 years. Completely false. Then when Romney said, oh, that's ridiculous, here are my tax returns, Reid had to recant it, but the damage was done. And then, of course, when Reid retired about 10 years later, a reporter asked him about why did he make those awful charges, and he said, well, it worked, didn't it? The classic of the left. They were able to defeat Romney. Well, this attack on Jared Kushner in the New York Times, he paid no taxes. The big headline, Jared Kushner paid no taxes for several years. Then the first sentence of the article says, Jared Kushner probably paid no taxes. Turns out the New York Times did not have any copies of his tax returns. What happened was some snitch at a bank where Jared Kushner applied for a loan before Trump was president, and where he had to disclose financial information, he dropped that information illegally, I might add, to the New York Times, who then brought in 3 financial experts to pore over those documents and declare that maybe he paid no taxes. In other words, this is a classic example of fake news. But when I say it's anti-Semitic, I'm saying that because Jared Kushner is one of America's most prominent Jewish public figures, it raises the fact, he's rich and he's greedy and he's ripping you off. Old anti-Semitic stereotypes that can galvanize the anti-Trump voters, and plus the fact that he's related to Trump by marriage gives the look that, yes, Donald Trump is being controlled by the Jews. This is their anti-Semitic card. And now we have the caravan coming in from Guatemala, putting aside the fact that President Trump, who often says things in an unpleasant and crude way, quite often turns out to be right when he says that there are people of Middle Eastern origin mixed into the caravan. The government of Guatemala has now arrested 100 people that they feel are affiliated with ISIS. And we don't know who's in the caravan. To have such a large caravan of people, well-fed, well-cared for, well-housed, it looks like it's something that's organized. And I guess that the left thinks that this is going to be a direct action that's going to hurt the Republicans, because what they do is they put the women and children up in the front. Most of the people on the caravan are men. And they hope that as they reach the border, maybe a couple of people, if they're lucky, will get shot, will get brutalized, so they can put that up on the optics and put that up on the news and say, you see, Republicans are killing children, that kind of stuff. Just like they did with the Obama cages. And they said, look, the Republicans are putting children in cages. I think most people saw through that story. It turned out to be bogus mostly. So they're working that, and all of a sudden this group is speeding toward the border and trying to get there before Election Day. And now we have a situation where bombs, or alleged bombs, doesn't even look like they're real bombs, are showing up at the homes of liberals like Hillary Clinton and former President Obama and others, and Joe Biden, and Robert De Niro, who has called Trump a fucking idiot, and on television, and other people, with the implication that somehow some right-wing, Republican is doing this. We don't know who's doing it, but the fact of the matter is that it's increasing people who otherwise are discredited in the eyes of the public. Suddenly, they now have a new cachet, a new prestige. In fact, Hillary Clinton down in Florida, introducing Donna Shalala, who's running for the Congress, and who is one of the few Democrats actually was willing to be seen on the same stage as Hillary. She gets interviewed and she looks downright jubilant. Oh, yes. Oh, they get to be high and mighty now because suddenly they're victims and there's bombs being delivered. Now, I don't know who did it, and I'm not going to jump to conclusions, but it seems to me that given the track record of the liberal Democrats and their lust for power, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that they might be behind this, but we don't know. Let's just wait and see let's not do like they tried to do with Kavanaugh and jump to conclusions before we see evidence. Anyway, I just hope and I pray that this does not work and that the Republicans are able to hold on to both houses of Congress, because if they don't, there's going to be hell to pay for all of us. We're going to see nothing but constant hearings and accusations and gnashing of teeth for the next 2 years. So let's get out and vote for Republicans and keep them control of both houses for the interests of the country, really, given the fact that where the Democratic Party is. And I'll just end by pointing out that they have a lot of nerve, as usual, in a major case of projection when they say that President Trump, and this is part of the narrative of the bombs, that he's responsible because he's stirring up hatred. Bullcrap. Take a look at Maxine Waters telling people to go out and attack pro-Trump people, get in their face. Take a look at the Secret Service that now has to be provided to Sarah Huckabee Sanders and to other Republicans who are being harassed in public places, and tell me who's being uncivil. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Chuck Morse. You're welcome to check out my books. They're all available at Amazon Books. Just put my name in the server, Chuck Morse, Morse like Morse code. And have a great day, everybody. Thanks a lot.